Happy belated New Year, everybody. I haven't posted anything in 2024 yet because I'm lazy and it's January, so I'm devoid of ideas. But that's going to change today. With Grand Theft Auto 6 set for 2025, I thought it would be a good idea to do some stream playthroughs followed up with videos on Grand Theft Auto 4 and then 5. And those streams so far have been good, it's just they're simply going to take far too long. So what I've done is I've decided to whip out an entire playthrough of Grand Theft Auto 4 on PC, so I can do this video and my stream series independently, so I can at the very least feel as if I have a work ethic. So I sat down over the course of a few days and sunk an ungodly amount of hours into Grand Theft Auto 4, playing it from start to that infamous helicopter glitch. And that's basically the PC version's canon ending. And the purpose of this video is to have some fun and see what Grand Theft Auto 4 is like to play in 2024. 16 years after its 2008 release, although not quite, as so far it's nowhere near April, unless you're watching this after the fact. But allow me. Before we begin, I want to say my experience with the GTA series is awfully limited. As a kid, this was the one video game franchise I wasn't really allowed to play. And looking back, that was probably for the best, because the underlying commentary that makes these games socially acceptable probably would have gone right over my head. My love for Rockstar games has evolved thanks to Red Dead Redemption and perhaps more accurately its prequel, Red Dead Redemption 2, although if you're a regular viewer of mine there's a good chance you already understand that. In short, I love the way Rockstar weaves lore into its games. It's something that I find to be absolutely surreal, and that's why I thought before GTA 6 comes anywhere close to coming out, I'd best get caught up to an acceptable extent at the very least. So yeah, from a narrative perspective, this is more of a new experience to me rather than a throwback, but please enjoy nonetheless. In Grand Theft Auto 4, we play as Niko Bellic, a man of Eastern European origins. He's illegally entered the United States of Cheeseburger to begin a new life and reconnect with his cousin, Roman, who's got a strange obsession with bowling. They live in an apartment together and share a sofa bed, and I mean, I'm from Devon and that's weird to even me. But the point is, Niko's introduction to the American dream is a bit wank, and to escape this life of squalor there's only one sensible option: doing crimes. Niko finds himself swiftly rubbing elbows with the criminal underbelly of Liberty City, very much so intended to be a parody of New York City, except instead of the Statue of Liberty you've got Hillary Clinton. And the parody aspect is arguably what makes Rockstar games what they are. It may not have been obvious to my younger self, but now that I have at least a brain cell, it is. Through the years, the Grand Theft Auto games have consistently sparked controversy due to their superficial aspects. And though there's plenty of stuff that's entirely unrealistic and ridiculous within the GTA games, the parody is more often than not rooted in very harsh realities, delivered in such an insightful and impactful way that I'd argue it's actually genius. Allow me to explain. The Grand Theft Auto games deliver it in such a way that it appears wild, but the reality is it's just removing filters. It's a very long-winded satirical commentary on American culture, and I suppose you could apply it to the broader Western world, but chiefly it's you guys. But for the sake of not ripping the piss out of the Americans too much, because there'll be plenty of that to come anyway, I'm going to apply this logic to the broader Western world. In the Western world, we're often told that we're free and life is great, and that trains us to view things at face value. But the problem is society is not perfect, and there are issues that do get dismissed, often swept under a rug by people with agendas, or just simply because we don't want to accept it. But they are still there, and being sober to this truth is not a rare thing. All Grand Theft Auto does is flip the perception of Western society on its head. Granted, with some exaggeration, the less than savoury aspects of the Western world are now at the forefront, so while we're used to viewing the beaming head of the Western world, in these games we're viewing its arse. You can look deeper and see the commentary in it, or you can take it at face value, but you can't avoid it anymore. Seeing the face value is what a lot of people do when they take to social media or whatever to slate these games and call for its banning based on the very things that it brings to the surface. And these are often the very same people the games are there to mock. And so I'd suggest the controversy is intentional on Rockstar's part, as it ensnares irony from the very people it's having a go at. And as a result, momentarily, the real world becomes an extension to that satire. And also clever free marketing. But in the game, it's not delivered in a way that makes it overtly self-aware. At least not to the point where the social commentaries dictate the game's tone. You can still take it seriously as a narrative experience despite the accentuation and exaggeration of perhaps America's worst aspects. And that's how the GTA games can occupy multiple dimensions rather than simply just parody. And this is where a lot of similar games exploring similar themes, set in contemporary open worlds, not dissimilar to GTA, have faltered. In Grand Theft Auto 4's case, at the very least, it takes these stereotypes and other mockeries and transforms it into a compelling narrative. The impact of the environment on the characters in the story is not wasted, but the comical aspects to GTA 4's nature don't hold it back when it wishes to take itself more seriously. Niko Bellic is a compelling main protagonist. He's a criminal through and through, and he's prone to stupid amounts of violence, and yet there's still a clear separation between him and the game's antagonists, even if they're also criminals. Because even though characters like Niko Bellic hold morals that we simply won't share, there's accessible depth that helps us understand his position within this world. We come to learn of his past and the things he's done before the story, so in a simple sense we at the very least understand his background, and then the narrative sees him instantly disillusioned with the American dream. And that's probably quite a relatable theme to a lot of people, even if it's presented through an entirely different walk of life to the norm. And then Niko's situation is mirrored by his cousin Roman, who's in a not too dissimilar position to Niko, but a virtually polar opposite outlook on life. As the parallel theme of Niko rebuilding his life after arriving in America plays out, the game gives us constant reminders that this is still not a good place to be, as Niko occupies what is a bastardized reality, at least compared to the promises of riches that Roman used to entice him over. But that's not all the narrative depth to Niko Bellic. He also has his own personal motivation for being present in Liberty City. He's also out for revenge, hunting down 2 former members of his military unit from back home, as one betrayed him, though it's unclear which. This backstory also explains why Niko's a bit of a one-man army in gameplay, but there is an aspect of crime fantasy to the game and you'd want to be hard as nails in that, so that's just justifying it, I guess. But it becomes part of the narrative device that compels Niko going forwards. His search for vengeance adds tone, perspective and tension to the story. And considering it's not the only direction it's coming from, serving nicely as another layer in a gritty, deep story. One of a mysterious man from a faraway foreign land haunted by his past, both searching for closure or vengeance, and also simultaneously a future, and the inevitable incompatibility of those two simultaneous pursuits. And as the story develops into the later stages of the game, deciding which takes priority is up to the player. The ultimate decisions are up to us. Is Niko a merciless killer, or is there more to him than that? I suppose it mirrors taking Grand Theft Auto at face value for the themes it represents, or do you observe the satirical value and understand why things are depicted the way they are? We get the ultimate say in deciding whether or not there's more to Niko Bellic, just like it's up to the player how they observe GTA. Is it intended to be a social commentary on modern American culture? Or is it just a blatant sadism simulator where you consume 20 burgers and then go and smash somebody's head in with a bottle of mustard, without an ounce of moral consideration? Where you're free to vicariously go bowling or visit a gentleman's club? Do you accept the escapism of actions without the consequences, or do you dig deep and find the meaning behind it all? GTA isn't necessarily one or the other in that respect, as there's certainly some dissonance between the sandbox aspect to the open world gameplay and the highly character-driven plot. But that's just something that open worlds have to deal with. The mechanics that a story needs in order to function are largely available for the player to go off and replicate massacres, but without the context the story provides to make such bloodbaths justifiable. However, with the emphasis of the narrative being more on the characters than the events, it's really not much of an issue. Speaking of characters, this is not an area where GTA 4 lacks. Apparently it won the VGX award for the best performance by a human male, which I only mention because I find it somewhat amusing that they had to specify human. And I mean, we've already gone over Niko's terrific value as a character. He is, after all, the perfect vessel for deconstructing the American dream. He complements this game's many social commentaries, such as this game's portrayal of the stereotype of American ignorance, for example. There are several occasions where Niko Bellic is confused for being Russian, something he's quick to correct, and it's one of the many things highlighting the fact that Niko is embodying the outsider's perspective of America. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the main things that makes him compelling. But moving on, of course, the story is made great by other characters. Roman Bellic, for example, is Niko's cousin and closest friend, and throughout the story he serves to contrast Niko. Where he's cynical and pessimistic, Roman is the optimist. And when Niko is busy, Roman wants to go bowling.
Niko, it's your cousin. You want to shoot some pool?
This isn't a good time, Roman. I got another type of shooting on my mind.
Or something. But seriously, as annoying as it is, at some point you've got to bite the bullet and bowl with the man, otherwise you're a fucking monster. He's also still stuck pursuing the American dream, something that Niko is almost instantly detached from. On top of all that, GTA 4 puts emphasis on the value of the supporting cast, like running a taxi service the player can both use and work for, though often I've noticed when you bell him up to call a taxi, he seldom answers. There are other characters of note, such as Jacob, who's just sound, Brucey, who probably doesn't sleep with vaccinated women, this absolute narcissist, who sends you to massacre gangs so he can say he's cleaning up the streets, Dwayne Forge, whose cynical outlook on life, formed from his own hardships, affords Niko the rare pleasure of actually being able to connect with somebody, whose fate you'll have to decide over that of Playboy, who has a fancy apartment filled with self-obsessed memorabilia. And between those two you have to choose who to kill. Killing Dwayne gets you money from Playboy. However, killing Playboy means you can take his apartment. And Niko proceeds to never take down all the narcissistic memorabilia surrounding the place. And that's worth it, even if only to have a place where it isn't implied that you share a bed with your cousin. And that's not the only time you have to face weighing up which ally to kill. And though the outcome is typically rather isolated either way, it's rendered a hard decision by the value in sparing either life. Beyond that, a lot of the supporting cast are isolated to their roles in the relevant concurrent arcs, but for the characters who actually have a sort of friendship with Niko, you can arrange to meet up with them and do things. Niko can even have love interests, with an early game example being Michelle, a character who is so painfully obviously an undercover agent of some description that it actually physically hurts. Not that it necessarily stops her from helping Niko casually commit felonies.
Is that new? That top?
Out of the way.
You should have checked the mirror before you bought it.
On these dates, you take that special someone somewhere nice, and unless there's an actual activity baked into the gameplay to partake in once there, you'll just immediately be done. And if that particular location of choice entails implied drinking, you'll have to drive your date home drunk. And then you can try your luck for the warm coffee achievement, which probably requires no explanation, but it depends entirely on how far along that relationship has progressed. But dates are effectively spicy friend outings, of which they do quickly get somewhat tiresome, and friends can call you first if you don't call them in a timely fashion, and declining results in a thumbs down icon appearing in the corner. But Niko is a very popular guy, his phone is practically buzzing 24/7, so make sure to head to an internet cafe appropriately named Twat, head to VIPluxuryringtones.com and purchase the old woman breaking her hip ringtone, which for the record sounds like this. Delightful. Even though GTA 4's friendship system is a wee bit flat, and at times slightly irritating, it is a great way to learn more about the characters that you interact with as a part of the story outside of that. And there's certainly a place for that system to remain in GTA. I know it was in 5 to some extent, so it'd be good to see that retained for GTA 6, and of course evolved applicably. As for antagonistic characters, well, as you'd expect from a game that revolves around organised crime within the first world, discerning friend from foe is often unclear, at least until they either reveal they're your enemy, or prove they're your ally. And this is how the game's main antagonist is revealed in Dimitri Raskolov, who at first comes across as a level-headed acquaintance, albeit an untrustworthy one that gets Niko to do his dirty work, including betraying and murdering Dimitri's partner Mikhail Faustin.
What is it?
Dimitri then turns on Niko Bellic, revealing himself to be a cunning and calculated villain, one who, though physically unimposing, commands a menacing presence through suspense. After his initial betrayal, his screen presence is rather limited for the vast majority of the rest of the game, though he does regularly phone and taunt Niko, reinforcing his presence despite not actually being present in a way that's as brazen as it is cowardly. And though in a head-on confrontation you get the feeling there's no doubt Niko would be the favourite to win, you feel Dimitri certainly has the gravity to be a real threat. But the game frankly doesn't have the need for a massive antagonist, with the narrative focused more on Niko's character development, and the theme of both pursuing the future and the past at the same time. Dimitri's significance actually stems from the choice he embodies rather than being the antagonist. Not long before, Niko's character development comes to a head, in finally having found the man who betrayed his unit. Now confronted with the man whose crimes really are no more severe than his own, so addled by cynicism, guilt and probably drugs, it's up to the player to decide whether or not taking Darko's life is worth it. Considering the toll Niko's past has taken on his present, obstructing his future, to me the correct choice appeared to be sparing Darko's life, allowing Niko, even if only psychologically, to move on. However, soon after, he's confronted with the choice of striking a deal with Dimitri, at the request of a crime boss he's done a few jobs for, or putting an end to Dimitri's treacherous threat with a bullet, a decision which decides which ending you get to the game. The deal ending or the revenge ending, which I find to be quite poorly titled, especially if you spared Darko like me. In doing that, it feels more like a decision between sacrificing principles to put the past to bed peacefully, risking Dimitri betraying you again, or disposing of that threat before it gets a chance to do so, potentially making an enemy of a desperate lunatic. There's no safe option here, both decisions have their own consequences. To me, the revenge ending made the most sense in every sense but the actual framing of it, because it didn't feel like a revenge mission. The choice to confront and put an end to Dimitri struck me more as a calculated move, as there's no guarantee Dimitri wouldn't betray Niko again, and making an enemy of a has-been mafia boss sat atop a crumbling empire, though not entirely risk-free, strikes me as infinitely safer than shaking hands and walking away from a pathologically treacherous powerful member of the Russian mob. And considering this ending gives us a massive gunfight aboard the Platypus, the ship that Niko actually arrived on at the start of the game, it feels like a satisfying finale. And as a result, Dimitri faces the coward's death befitting his personality. Either way you go about it though, there are consequences in the next mission, when we must attend Roman Belik's wedding. Of course, I'm baffled it was held in a church and not a bowling alley, but the consequences go like this. If you strike a deal with Dimitri, Dimitri shows up and kills Roman. However, if you kill Dimitri, like I did, the mafia boss you just pissed off in killing Dimitri will rock up and in an attempt to kill Niko will miss and accidentally kill Kate McCreary, Niko Belik's late game love interest, though she'd actually also died on me earlier on in the playthrough during a random date. We went to a bar and got heavily inebriated, and then when we came out she dropped dead randomly. It was an immediately sobering experience for Niko, and then miraculously she somehow lived. But it will be interesting to see how she fares now the power of plot is pitted firmly against her. And I have the sneaky suspicion this time she won't be majestically resurrected at a hospital. And that brings us to the final mission of the entire narrative, wrapping up the final loose end, exacting lukewarm vengeance on Pegorino for Kate's murder. And though by this point I had the gameplay firmly under my belt, this happened.
Niko, you can do it! Climb! Up, Niko! Get up here!
The apparently infamous helicopter glitch claims a new victim. Basically, you've got to repeatedly tap A to climb into the chopper, or the spacebar if you're using keyboard and mouse. However, that only changes the camera angle. And then once the chopper tilts, you fall off and fail the mission. Considering this game has a grand total of fuck all mission checkpoints, if you fail a mission you've got to restart the mission. That is infuriating. I looked up solutions to this glitch and apparently the only one that's reliably able to work is to, just before making the jump to jump onto the chopper, you need to close Grand Theft Auto, not fully, just minimize it, go into your task manager and make sure that only one CPU core is allocated to the game. But already being on Google, you're halfway to YouTube, so I just looked up the last 5 minutes of the game online. This game has been on PC for a very long time. I am baffled that a game-breaking bug this bad is still there, but at least it's an amusing ending to an otherwise tragic conclusion. Niko Belik, a man from a faraway land, arrived in America, both in pursuit of his past and his future. As he worked his way up the ranks of organised crime in Liberty City, he came to the realisation that he couldn't have both, but not before making both friends and enemies in his new home. Rising up the ranks, Niko slowly comes to realise that a life of crime surrounded by bad people isn't what he truly desires, and every action in this gritty Forsaken underworld has its consequences, but unless he makes that change, the vicious cycle of violence will never end. But he's in too deep to evacuate that lifestyle without it exacting one final crippling blow. The main story of Grand Theft Auto 4 is made compelling through the moral dilemmas that Niko Bellic faces. Unlike other characters in Grand Theft Auto, Niko isn't really fazed by the money. I mean, it's obviously nice, but what he's truthfully searching for is closure to a traumatic event in his life that occurred a long time ago, followed ideally by a clean slate. His combat-proven abilities allow him to rise the ranks of organised crime quickly, but you get the vibe that's not his endgame. He has zero interest in being top dog or even making a name for himself, constantly seeing what becomes of those who try. But being involved with that world grants him the resources over time that he needs to finally conclude his past and start focusing properly on his future. Niko Bellic is a fantastic main protagonist and is one of the many reasons why Grand Theft Auto 4 is such a terrific game. With the narrative in my mind covered, let's talk about the rest of it. Games are nothing without gameplay, and Grand Theft Auto 4's gameplay is as much a hindrance as it is great fun. Mission design in Rockstar games, though often spiced up by the refreshing of certain mechanics every now and then, as well as a lot of unique goings on for particular missions, has always struggled with being a bit hopeless and jarringly linear compared to the open world it presents us with. Missions largely consist of following markers and doing things the exact way the game tells you to, or you might risk being met with a ridiculously elaborate fail message. But if Rockstar was still doing that to an extent in Red Dead Redemption 2, then I was fully anticipating that being in the decade-older Grand Theft Auto 4. In my opinion, though, in future I'd like to see Rockstar account for more player agency in their main story missions. The linearity in mission structure has never been a huge issue for me. I'm more interested in the good story, and GTA 4 certainly delivered there. But there is one aspect to Grand Theft Auto 4's mission structure that really did grind my gears a lot, and it is something that Rockstar has since addressed, and it did become less of an issue the more I got used to the game, and that is of course the absence of checkpoints. If you fail a mission at any point, you have to restart the entire mission. It is as punishing as it is tedious, and I do accept the punishing aspect, but it was disheartening even if you were just messing around to find out what would happen. But I can't help but think the absence of checkpoints actually severely limited what any particular mission could do and how elaborate it could be. And of course, blindsiding the player with overwhelming challenge out of nowhere becomes unforgivable when the last 10 to 20 minutes of gameplay within that mission has been relatively slow paced, which means that replaying it would be tedious. Instead, you get this arcade-like mission design where the challenge usually builds up gradually, meaning missions after a bit do become somewhat predictable. And as a result, from a gameplay perspective, at times they are a bit of a slog. Not only does it stump you for a bit, but it also makes this helicopter bug infinitely more frustrating. It's not like anything that's happening is too hard, which does balance things out to an acceptable standard, but I'd take checkpoints and a little bit more ramped up challenge and less predictable mission structure because it keeps players engaged. Though it must be said, this is something that Rockstar has since learned from. If only there was a bit more emphasis on player agency within the confines of the story missions, then it would be golden now. But if we look at Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2's list of elaborate fail messages, for example, it seems as if they put more thought into denying player agency than actually providing it. In that respect, even GTA 5 has some bangers. And though I'll hold out no hopes, I'd like to see Grand Theft Auto 6 expand the scope of a lot of the missions in how they're structured to account for the fact that the player might have their own idea as to how a certain objective might be accomplished outside of what will obviously work and then what the game actually wants you to do. But away from the non-stop ramble about Rockstar Games' mission structure, and let's talk about some other gameplay elements of Grand Theft Auto 4. Don't mind me, I'm just calling Michelle to go on a date in my brand new ambulance. I suppose driving is a good place to start. It does depend on the car, and when there are exceptions it's very nice. But the vast majority of motor vehicles in Liberty City handle like land yachts, even if they aren't supposed to be. Cornering is a bastard when in most vehicles you kind of have to give the brakes 2 weeks of written notice, so in the less good cars you're either going in a straight line or you're on fire. That said, once you've got a good rhythm and you can anticipate quite far ahead, you're usually set, and it makes the better vehicles that by decree of Sod's Law will not spawn if you're looking for them, even more fun to drive when you can actually find one. I'd also imagine the bounciness of a lot of the cars appeal to some people more than others. Motorbikes on the other hand are amusing because Niko has an infinite supply of multicoloured helmets in his pockets somehow, but I also found the motorbikes to be easier to control when Niko was drunk for some reason. But the handling of the cars and bikes isn't realistically the issue, but rather the intelligence of all the NPC motorists. At times they just randomly cause pile-ups without any instigation. It is a sight to behold. But my favourite aspect to driving in GTA 4 doesn't actually require me to drive at all. My favourite experiences on the road in Grand Theft Auto 4 are typically experienced from the back of a taxi. Not like that, don't even dare go there. They'll drive normally for the most part, but if you press X, you can ask the driver to hurry. In pressing this button, you enter a taxi experience that I like to refer to as Bradford mode. Watch in awe as your taxi driver will violate every single rule of the road and quite possibly the Geneva Convention in a bid to get you to your destination as fast as humanly possible. With no regard for the condition of their vehicle, crashes are inevitable. They will find shortcuts even if there is no through route, whatever it takes. This vehicle isn't worth the meager $20 you're giving me to take you to your location. There are even instances where the taxi driver will give up taking you to your destination entirely and just start ramming people. It's not uncommon for this to actually take more time than simply sitting there and waiting patiently. But it is the most unintentionally funny thing because it's entirely accidental. But when you arrive at your destination, completing the fare of $18 and then look at the utter state of the now dilapidated taxi, you realise that this is truly the supreme way to traverse Liberty City. I will take taxis in this game simply for shits and giggles, but it can also double up as a fast travel system, which is quite useful. Anyway, the other form of transport you can take are the trains, and well, they're trains, so yeah. Let's move on to another avenue of the gameplay altogether, le combat. The hand-to-hand combat is straightforward, though you don't really find yourself doing it very often outside the tutorial for how to do it. So when it comes to the one occasion that I can think of where it's actually useful later on, you kind of forget what you're doing for a second. As for using knives, well, I'm British, so stabbing people is second nature to me. The truth is, in GTA 4 the vast majority of the combat gameplay is gunplay. I will say the auto aim assist does default to being very hand-holdy when it doesn't necessarily need to be so zealous. I find that Rockstar games without an aim assist of some description tend to be quite stiff, and I'm not terribly familiar with what settings are available as I didn't really mess with them. I know at the very least you can turn it fully off, but sometimes you need that quick snap between targets when you don't really have any cover, or you do and just can't be bothered using it. The gunplay regardless is satisfying when you get it going, but don't underestimate this game's ability to lock onto people you can't hit and refuse to budge, as that will force you to move position more than the enemy AI ever will. There are plenty of weapons to choose from handguns to assault rifles all the way up to rocket launchers, and the majority of the time you'll only have access to those weapons in missions if you have ammo for them. Even though Niko has endless pockets filled with assault rifles, handguns, rocket launchers and 20 different variations of motorcycle helmet, the moment you run out of ammunition for your firearm, Niko will just simply drop it, even though he'll have to buy a new gun later and then ammunition on top. You also have grenades and they're fun. Beyond that, there are plenty of cool environments to shoot people in, and I really don't know what more you could ask for. But often my favourite approach is to base up as far away as I can and then take out as many enemies as possible with a sniper rifle. There are moments where you can do this and it vastly simplifies your objective, and I also like that you can't just rely on one tactic always to simply see you through every single gunfight possible. They're simplistic systems, but they hold up for the most part, and that's what counts. You can also fire from vehicles, and there's no aim assist for that, but there's also less of a risk of you being shot at, or at least hit several times successively in a short amount of time. So it kind of evens out. But the best aspect is that before going into a mission you need to get into the habit of preparing, You don't recover health, and you can buy body shields from gun stores. Every now and then you might come across a med pack or a bulletproof vest in the middle of a firefight, but to give yourself the best advantage possible, you need to pay attention to how much ammunition, health and armor you have before you go into a mission. Otherwise, at times you can be put at a serious disadvantage. It provides emphasis on caring, and that's important for good gameplay. And those are the main two aspects of the Grand Theft Auto gameplay formula: driving and fighting. Oh, and then there's evading the police, but unless you've got like 10 helicopters on you, it's not too hard. In fact, it's probably not hard even then because there's too much air traffic and they'll just crash into each other. As for the activities, you can wolf down tons of food right in front of the very person who sold it to you, as he questions his reality after you've consumed 25 burgers in a row. We've already gone over the meeting up with friends aspects, we're not going to revisit that. There's plenty of entertainment to be had, like going out and watching shows of all kinds of descriptions, like Red Dead Redemption, but Just Dance. You can even see Ricky Gervais do comedy. It is a product of its time, okay? You can also visit naughty clubs, and at first I genuinely thought this icon was a mustache. You can also stay in one of your many safe houses and simply watch brain-rotting television, or cruise through the city listening to the various absurd goings-on and music across the various radio stations. The absence of a radio station simply playing the Freebird solo on repeat is simply a wasted opportunity, in my opinion, but driving around Liberty City on a rainy night with one of the more sensible radio stations on is honestly quite an enjoyable vibe, as the kids say. But heading to an internet cafe and then just browsing the internet for a bit is also very fun, because there is all sorts of hidden Easter eggs, lore, and double meaning jokes and all sorts in there just to chuckle at or learn about this universe. It's quite interesting. You can also send and receive emails and pick up work through that, such as the respectable occupation of stealing cars. There is a lot to take in this fictional variation of the internet, and what baffles me is, even though it's intended to come across as highly ridiculous, I'm baffled by how remarkably sane it is when compared to the modern internet of the real world. As for the side content, there are of course encounters Niko can have throughout the open world of Liberty City. Typically very wacky individuals who baffle Niko endlessly.
Yes, comrade, I am doing good. There is no I, there is only we. It is a glorious system, comrade.
Excuse me?
You're excused, comrade, you're excused. Now go and mine salt for 50 years.
You're a dick.
I'm a rich dick, friend. I'm young and rich and loaded. Tell you what, have $100 on Uncle Sam, Benjamin motherfucking Franklin. Freedom! This coke is okay.
If you have access to a police car, you can also search the police database and do vigilante missions. I'm not overly sure why you would, but it is side content. You can also receive assassination contracts by interacting with a mysterious fixer via payphones, or go and find the Easter eggs, secrets and hidden lore around Liberty City. I'd be happy to go off and explore some of those in my Red Dead Redemption format if that's something you guys would be interested in. But the point I'm trying to make in this video at least is Liberty City isn't an empty open world space to be used as a backdrop. It's very much so just as much a character as any of the actual characters. Its characterization is rich, and though there isn't necessarily always something of note around every single turn, there's plenty to be doing for all kinds of people, and therefore there's plenty of fun to be had. Moving on to the technical front, bugs? Yes. As for the visuals, it's a 2008 game that looks like it's from about that time. It hasn't aged poorly or amazingly, it has just simply aged. I don't know what else there is to say on that one. I still think it looks kinda good, but above a certain point I've never cared too much for the visuals. It's nice to have them, but I can still easily go from a game released nowadays with the best visuals ever to a game released 15-20 years ago. It doesn't bother me. So how has Grand Theft Auto 4 aged? In my opinion, GTA 4 has aged like a fine wine, which is what everyone says, ever. So overall, Grand Theft Auto 4 is a game I've thoroughly enjoyed playing, albeit briefly in the past, and it's good to finally sit down and commit to a full playthrough. Sort of. I remember years and years ago I had to head over to a friend's to play it, but they didn't turn out to be a friend after all, so that one was very short-lived. Playing it now and understanding its narrative gravity along with its superficial fun aspects and the deeper meaning behind all of its satire elements made me wish that I'd properly bothered sooner. But at least I finally bothered, I guess. And it was well worth the hours that I sunk into it. And before anybody goes and asks, yes, I will finish my stream playthrough eventually. I just don't have the social battery to consistently stream on a regular basis these days. I don't know what's happened to it, but I used to be able to go day after day just live streaming endlessly, and now it's a bit more of a slog than that. But making actual videos is a lot easier on my sanity, so I thought I'd separate the video making process from the live streaming, just so that I can enjoy streaming. And yes, I do read my chats, as in my opinion that's the entire point of streaming. So if you're new to this channel, come along to one of my streams sometime, and though I can't promise that I'll be able to acknowledge everybody, I'll do my best to get through the vast majority of people. Beyond that, cheers for all your patience on me getting started with my content plans for 2024. I don't typically like waiting this long in between videos. It makes me feel lazy, but with Christmas and the New Year in there, a little break from main channel videos couldn't do any harm. Anyway, thank you all for watching this video. I really hope that you've enjoyed it. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff if you wish to do so. And with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point. But until next time, please take care and goodbye.